She spent 3 days baking that cake. 3 days. By hand. Blue frosting. 3 layers. Because her little boy was turning 5, and she wanted everything to be perfect. And then, in front of 35 people, her husband grabbed the back of her head and pressed her face into it. Slow. Deliberate. Like a message being delivered in public. His girlfriend hit record before the silence even settled. She was already smiling. His mother crossed her arms and whispered one word. Finally. 34 adults stood frozen. Not one person moved. Not one voice said, "Stop." The only person who ran to her was her 5-year-old son. Now here is what none of them knew. Not the husband, not the mother, not the girlfriend with the camera already raised. The woman standing there with blue frosting dripping from her chin. The woman they had just humiliated in front of everyone she had ever welcomed into her home was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the American Southeast. And she had given up every single dollar of it, willingly, years before, because she wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she came from. Stay with me, because what she did next did not just change her life, it changed every life in that room. And it will change the way you think about the quiet woman standing right next to you. Value statement, delivered in calm, warm narrator tone. This story is not just about betrayal and revenge. It is about what happens when a woman finally remembers who she is and decides that the people who forgot deserve to find out. Meaning, every week on this channel, we bring you stories like Claire's. Stories where dignity is tested, where silence gets mistaken for weakness, and where the truth, when it finally arrives, lands with the full weight of everything that was endured to get there. Because some lessons can only be told through a story. And some stories carry truths that stay with you long after the video ends. My name does not matter right now. What matters is what I watched happen at a little boy's birthday party in Nashville, Tennessee, on a Saturday afternoon in September. I have told a lot of stories in my life, stories about betrayal, about men who believed they were untouchable, about women who were pushed so far down that the people around them forgot they were standing on a human being. But I have never told a story quite like this one, because this one ends differently. Here's where we start. A backyard in southwest Nashville, 35 people, a 3-layer vanilla cake with blue frosting that a woman spent 3 days making by hand for her little boy. Streamers hung from a pecan tree. Dinosaur napkins folded on a card table. 5 candles burning in the September afternoon. The little boy blew them out in one breath. Everyone clapped. And then, in front of every single person in that yard, the boy's father grabbed the back of his wife's head and pressed her face into that cake. Not a shove, not a moment of rage he could later blame on drink or temper. Slow, deliberate, controlled, like a message being hand-delivered. Blue frosting exploded across the tablecloth. It covered her eyes, her nose, her mouth. Her hands shot forward and gripped the table edge. Her body went rigid. The yard went completely silent in under 2 seconds. His girlfriend raised her phone and hit record. She was smiling before she even started filming. His mother crossed her arms. She nodded once, slowly, and turned to the woman beside her and whispered one word. Finally. 34 adults stood frozen. Not one person moved. Not one person said stop. Not one person reached for the woman with blue frosting dripping from her chin. The only person who moved was the birthday boy. He was 5 years old. He launched himself off his chair and ran across the grass with both arms outstretched, stumbling on the uneven ground, reaching for his mother's face, trying to wipe the frosting away with his small hands. "Mommy, mommy, mommy." His little voice split through that silence like a crack running through glass. She lifted her head slowly. She did not scream. She did not curse. She did not throw anything. She reached down, picked up her son, and wiped his tears before she wiped a single trace of frosting from her own face. Then she walked inside. The screen door closed quietly behind her. Her husband turned back to the party. "She is fine," he said. "She is always dramatic. Now, before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you who this woman really was and exactly what she did about all of it, I need you to understand something important. The story does not start in that backyard. It starts 12 years earlier in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina on a 400-acre estate surrounded by oak trees and morning fog, where a young woman named Claire made a decision that everyone around her thought was foolish, and that would take 10 years, a ruined marriage, a bathroom floor, and a ballroom full of the right witnesses to prove was actually the bravest thing she ever did. She was right about love being worth more than a last name. She was also about to spend the next decade learning exactly how much that belief was going to cost her. Claire Harrington grew up on land that had been in her family for 3 generations. Not the flashy kind of wealth, not the kind you see on magazine covers or reality television. The old kind, the quiet kind. Rolling green pastures outside Asheville, a stone fountain at the end of the main drive, a library inside the house with more books than the county branch downtown. The kind of wealth that has never once felt the need to prove anything to anyone because it has always known exactly what it is. Her father, George Harrington, was the 3rd generation to steward it. He wore simple clothes. He drove a pickup truck with a dent above the rear left wheel that he never bothered to fix. He knew every person who worked on his property by first name, by the names of their children, by the things that kept them up at night. He raised Claire alone after her mother, Margaret, passed from an aggressive cancer when Claire was 7 years old. He taught her to cook, taught her to tend a garden, taught her that kindness was a form of intelligence and that cruelty was always, without exception, a sign of fear. Every Sunday evening, George and Claire sat on the back porch of the estate, and he told her stories about Margaret. How she could walk into a room full of noise and without saying a word, make everyone in it feel calmer, just by being there. How she laughed at things that did not deserve to be laughed at, and made them worth laughing at anyway. When Claire turned 8, George sat her down at the kitchen table and placed a small jewelry box in front of her. Inside was a thin silver bracelet with a small compass charm, Margaret's. He had kept it in his coat pocket since the day she died. He fastened it around Claire's wrist and said, "This compass belonged to your mother. She wore it every day of her adult life, not because she needed it to find her way, but because it reminded her that she always had one. No matter how lost things felt, she had a direction. And so do you, Claire Bear, always." Claire never took that bracelet off. Not once in 26 years. Ticked. When Claire turned 22, she made a decision that confused nearly everyone who loved her. She told George she wanted to leave, not the estate, not her family. She wanted to leave the name. She sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he had fastened the compass bracelet and around her wrist, and told him what she had been rehearsing for months. "Daddy," she said, "I want to be loved for who I am, not for what I come from, not for the last name, not for the number in any account. I want someone to choose me, just me. And I want to know for the rest of my life that it was real." George was quiet for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, one of the horses moved in its paddock. The afternoon light came through the window at the angle it only reaches in October. Then he said, "You know what that is going to cost you?" "Yes, sir." "You know there are people in this world who will see your open heart as an open door. Yes, sir. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. He set up a trust in her name, untouched, growing silently, and told her, "The door home is always open, Claire Bear. Day or night. You never have to explain yourself. You just have to walk through it." She packed one bag. She drove her old Honda Civic across the Tennessee state line and into Nashville. She changed her public last name to Whitmore, her mother's maiden name, which felt like carrying Margaret with her without advertising it. She found a job at a small catering company. She rented an apartment with a broken dishwasher and a radiator that knocked every night at 2 in the morning like a polite ghost. She was happy in a way she had not expected, the particular happiness that comes from choosing your own ordinary life. And then, 6 months after she arrived, she met Daniel Shaw. Daniel Shaw grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee, 45 minutes northwest of Nashville, in a 2-bedroom house that always seemed to be one bad month away from something worse. His father left when Daniel was 11. His mother, Melissa, raised him and his younger sister, Sandra, on a waitress's income and an iron will and a deep, unshakable belief that her son was destined for more than Clarksville could offer him. Melissa Shaw loved her son the way some mothers love their children. Completely, exclusively, and at the expense of everyone else in his life. She told him he was exceptional. She told him he was meant for great things. She told him the world owed him something it had not yet delivered. She said it so often and with such conviction that Daniel absorbed it the way dry ground absorbs rain, until it was indistinguishable from his own belief about himself. He was charming, genuinely so. Quick smile, easy laugh, the kind of man who could talk to anyone at a party and make them feel like the most interesting person in the room. He got a job at a luxury car dealership in Nashville at 24. He was good at it, very good. He made commission checks that felt, to him, like confirmation of everything his mother had always told him. He met Claire at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning in April. She was buying peaches. He was pretending to look at honey so he could figure out how to start a conversation with her. She noticed him pretending. She smiled and said, "The clover honey is better than it looks." He laughed and admitted he had been standing there for 4 minutes, trying to think of something clever to say. She appreciated the honesty. Honesty, in her experience, was rarer than most people admitted. They talked for 2 hours, standing next to a table of jams and preserves. He called her that evening. She answered. He called again the next day. He was funny. He was warm. He talked about his dreams with an enthusiasm that felt like sunshine. He wanted to open his own dealership someday. He wanted to build something real. He talked about his mother, with a devotion that Claire, who had loved her own father with her whole heart, found deeply moving. She did not know then what that devotion would eventually cost her. They dated for 14 months. He proposed on the back porch of her apartment with a ring he had saved for 8 months to buy. He got down on one knee, and she said yes before he finished the sentence. Small wedding, Tennessee hills, 30 people. She wore her mother's dress, the compass bracelet was at her wrist as she said "I do." She thought she had found exactly what she had left Asheville to find. She was not wrong about that moment. She was wrong about how long it would last. The first 2 years were good. Not perfect, nothing real ever is, but genuinely good. They bought a house in a quiet neighborhood in southwest Nashville. Modest, clean, a backyard with a pecan tree that dropped nuts every October. Claire planted a garden along the south fence. Tomatoes, basil, zucchini. Daniel teased her about it and then ate everything she grew without complaint. Cooper was born 14 months after the wedding. Daniel cried in the delivery room. Real tears, the unself-conscious kind that men cry when something enormous happens and they forget to perform about it. He held his son for the first hour and would not put him down. Claire watched him and thought, This is what I came here for. She was not wrong about that moment either. She was wrong about what years and money and his mother's voice would eventually do to it. The shift began in year 3. Daniel got promoted. Senior sales first, then floor supervisor, then sales manager 8 months after that. His commission checks doubled, then tripled. He bought a new truck. He joined a gym in Green Hills that cost $400 a month. He changed his cologne. He started caring about the labels on his shirts in a way that had nothing to do with the shirts. None of those things are wrong in themselves. But Claire noticed something underneath them, a restlessness, a dissatisfaction that had nothing to do with what he had and everything to do with what he now believed he deserved. He started coming home later. The small daily texts dried up, where once he had sent her a photo of a funny bumper sticker from the dealership parking lot. Now entire days passed without a word. He started responding to things she said with a pause, just a fraction of a second too long. The particular pause of a man measuring whether someone's thoughts are worth engaging with. She noticed all of it. She cataloged it quietly, the way intelligent women catalog the small tremors before the large one, hoping they are wrong, hoping the ground will settle. Then Melissa started coming around more. Melissa Shaw had never liked Claire. Not from the first Sunday dinner Daniel brought her home to Clarksville. She had looked at Claire, at her quiet manner, her simple clothes, the silver bracelet on her wrist, the way she listened more than she spoke, and made a decision in the first 5 minutes. This woman was not enough for her son, and she began, slowly and methodically, to fill Daniel's ear with that conclusion. Every Sunday after church, every holiday dinner, every phone call that Daniel took in the other room that lasted 20 minutes longer than it should have. Baby, she is holding you back. A man like you needs a partner who matches his level. You have outgrown this. I just worry you settled. His sister Sandra echoed everything Melissa said, amplifying it the way younger siblings sometimes do. Casual cruelty dressed up as concern. Once at a family dinner, Sandra said in front of Claire, while Claire was passing the bread basket, "You could do so much better, Daniel. You know it too." No one acknowledged that Claire was standing 3 feet away. No one flinched. Daniel said nothing in her defense. That was the moment Claire understood that silence, this saw him, in this family, was not neutral. Silence was consent. It was a Wednesday in February, year 4 of the marriage. Claire spent the afternoon making Daniel's favorite dinner. Braised short ribs with rosemary roasted potatoes, the recipe he had once told her was the best thing he had ever eaten. She put Cooper to bed early. She set the table with candles. She opened the bottle of wine they had been saving for something special and decided that a Wednesday, when her marriage needed warmth, counted as something special enough. She sat down at 7 and waited. At 8, she moved the food to the oven on low. At 9:30, she blew out the candles because the wax was dripping onto the tablecloth. Daniel walked in at 11:47. He smelled like a restaurant she had never been to. His tie was loosened. He looked at the table, food covered in foil, candles melted to nothing, wine breathing untouched on the counter, and said, "I already ate." Then he walked past her and went upstairs. She sat at that table for 30 minutes after she heard the bedroom door close. Then she wrapped the food, washed every dish by hand, folded the tablecloth carefully, put the wine back. She did not cry until she was in the downstairs bathroom with the faucet running loud enough to cover the sound. Here is where I want to stop for a moment and speak to you directly. Because some of you are already doing the math in your head. You are thinking, why did she not leave? Why did she not say something? Why did she not fight back right then? And I want to give you the honest answer, because it is one of the most important things I will say tonight. She loved him. And love, the real kind, the kind a person has built a whole life around, does not die on a Wednesday night just because the man you gave it to came home late, smelling like someone else's restaurant. It dies slowly, in increments, in a series of small moments that, standing alone, girls seem like they could be explained. Each seem survivable. And the cruel truth about that kind of erosion is that by the time you see it clearly, you are already deep inside it. The person you were when you could have walked away easily feels like a stranger you once read about in a book. If you are in that place right now, if any part of that Wednesday night sounds familiar, I want you to hear this. Understanding why you stayed is not the same as accepting that you have to keep staying. Those are two entirely different things. 3 weeks after the empty table, Claire found a florist receipt in Daniel's jacket pocket. A bouquet delivered to an address on Granny White Pike she did not recognize. She asked him about it calmly on a Sunday morning. He told her she was paranoid. In April, she found a long strand of hair on his passenger seat. Not hers. Straightened. Faint smell of a floral perfume she did not own. She asked again. He told her she was insecure. In May, she picked up his phone to check the weather while hers was charging, and the screen lit up with a message from a contact listed simply as JC. Last night was exactly what I needed. Thank you for being you. She set the phone down. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. When Daniel came out of the shower, she asked him directly. No softening, no preamble. He looked at her with something she had never seen before on his face. Not guilt, not shame. A cold, flat irritation, like she was an interruption he had not scheduled. You need to stop going through my things, he said. And honestly, Claire, with everything I do for this family, you should be grateful I still come home at all. Write that sentence down. Put the date on it. Put it somewhere safe. Because that sentence is not frustration talking. It is not a man having a bad week. It is a declaration about how he sees the power between you. He is telling you that his presence is a gift he chooses to give. That your gratitude is owed and his loyalty is optional. When someone hands you a confession, disguised as cruelty, the wisest thing you can do is keep it. Jumped. Claire had one real friend in Nashville. Diane Mercer, 41 years old, pediatric nurse at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. Straight-talking, warm, the kind of woman who shows up with food before you ask, and stays until you are actually okay, not just performing okay. They had met at a neighborhood block party 3 years earlier when Diane handed Claire a plate of deviled eggs and said, I put too much mustard in these, and I am not sorry about it. Claire had laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. It was Diane who called on a Thursday afternoon in June. I need to tell you something, Diane said, and I need you to hear it without reacting until I am done. Can you do that? Yes. I saw Daniel's truck parked outside the Riverside Hotel on Tuesday night. I was driving home from a late shift. I sat there because I was not sure it was his. Then I checked the plate. She sent the photograph, license plate, timestamp, 11:48 in the evening. Claire looked at the photo for a long time. Then she said, Thank you for telling me. She hung up. She went to the kitchen. She made Cooper a grilled cheese sandwich for dinner. She gave him a bath. She read him 2 chapters of his dinosaur book. She tucked him in and kissed his forehead and stood in the doorway, watching him breathe for a moment. Then she sat at the kitchen table in the dark and began making a list. Jessica Caldwell did not stumble into Daniel Shaw's life. She walked into it with a blueprint. She was 31 years old, stylish in the calculated way of someone who has learned to weaponize appearance, and precise in the way of people who have spent years studying which rooms have the weakest walls. She had done this before, twice. Two previous relationships with married men, both of them insecure about their status, both susceptible to a woman who made them feel like the most important person in every room. She had extracted what she needed from each: money, access, lifestyle, and vanished the moment the situation stopped being useful. She left no forwarding address. She left nothing behind because to her, those men had never been anything more than a chapter she intended to finish and close. She arrived at Daniel's dealership as a finance specialist in January. Within 2 weeks, she had his schedule memorized. Within a month, she had his complete attention. She complimented him in ways Claire never thought to. Not because Claire lacked the ability, but because Claire had never believed that a man who loved you needed to be constantly performed for. Jessica understood something different. She understood that some men do not want a partner. They want an audience. She laughed at his jokes louder. She wore clothes designed to be noticed. She texted him good morning before Claire was awake and good night after Claire was asleep. She made him feel, at every moment, like the most important man in every room she chose to put him in. What Claire did not know yet, what none of them knew yet, was how Jessica had found her way to that dealership. 14 months before she submitted her application, Jessica Caldwell had attended a church fundraiser in Brentwood. She had sat at a table near the back and listened to a sharp-tongued woman with pearls and deep opinions about her son's marriage speak at length about the wrong kind of woman her son had ended up with. That woman was Melissa Shaw. They had gotten coffee twice afterward, then lunch. Melissa described Daniel, the way she always described him, as a man of extraordinary potential being quietly strangled by the wrong wife. Jessica had listened carefully, asked the right questions, and 3 weeks later applied for an open position at the dealership where Daniel worked. Melissa made one payment to Jessica's account the following week: $300. The digital record of that transfer would sit quietly in a server for 14 months, waiting. But we will come back to that. Over 3 weeks following the photograph, Claire collected evidence quietly: the florist receipt, Diane's photograph, bank statements showing charges she did not recognize, restaurants she had never been to, a hotel stay billed to their joint account on the night she had been in Asheville visiting George. She printed a screenshot of the text message. She organized everything into a folder: clean, dated, documented. She felt something she had not felt in months: clarity, the kind that feels like power because it finally gives you solid ground to stand on. On a Sunday morning in late June, with Cooper at Melissa's for the afternoon, she sat across from Daniel at the kitchen table and placed the folder between them. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She presented the information the way a woman presents something she knows is true. Daniel looked at the folder. He looked at each page. Then he leaned back and laughed, not nervously, genuinely, like she had told him a joke he found more funny than threatening. "Claire," he said, "what exactly do you think you are going to do with this?" She said she was considering her option. He said, "You do not work. You have no money of your own. You have no career. What lawyer is going to take your case on credit? I have an income, a mother who will testify to what kind of wife you have been, and a lawyer who owes me a favor. So tell me again, what are you going to do?" She held his gaze and did not answer. He picked up his phone and called Melissa. Right there at the kitchen table, in front of Claire. "Hey, Mama, can you keep Cooper for a few days? Claire needs some time to get herself together." Melissa arrived in 19 minutes. She had Cooper's bag packed before she walked in the door. She had been waiting for this call. Claire stood in the front doorway and watched Melissa buckle her son into the car seat. Cooper waved from the back window, confused but smiling because he was 5 years old and did not yet know that some goodbyes carry more weight than they appear to. The car backed out of the driveway. Claire stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she closed the door and sat on the hallway floor with her back against the wall. She understood now. This had not been a marriage failing. This had been a plan being executed, and she had been the only person at the table who did not know it. With Cooper gone for the week, Daniel stopped pretending entirely. Jessica's car appeared in the driveway on Tuesday evening. And again on Thursday. Melissa came over Friday afternoon, and the three of them sat on the back porch eating takeout at the table Claire had found at a garage sale and repainted herself over a weekend in spring. Sandra posted a photo that Saturday night. Family dinner at a steakhouse in Green Hills. Daniel, Melissa, Sandra, and Jessica tagged at the restaurant, laughing, no Claire, no Cooper, a complete family portrait with Claire surgically removed. Someone from Claire's neighborhood saw it and texted her the screenshot without a single word of explanation. Just the image, just the absence. Claire called Diane. Diane came over immediately. She found Claire sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets, not crying, just completely still in the particular way of a person who has moved past crying into something quieter and more dangerous. I do not know how to fight this, Claire said. I do not even know what I am fighting. Diane sat on the floor beside her without hesitation. Then we figure it out together, she said. But first you are going to eat something, because you cannot fight anything on an empty stomach, and I am not going to watch you be the person who falls apart before the good part gets here. Claire almost smiled. Almost. Cooper came home after 10 days. Claire threw herself into planning his birthday party the way she threw herself into everything she loved, completely, with both hands, without holding anything back. She baked a 3-layer vanilla cake with blue frosting, Cooper's favorite color. She hung streamers from the pecan tree. She arranged little chairs in a circle for the kids who were coming. She made a playlist of his favorite songs. She bought paper plates and napkins with dinosaurs on them and a pinata shaped like a T-Rex that took her 45 minutes to find online. Everything was modest. Everything was touched with care. She invited 35 people, neighbors, parents from Cooper's daycare, a few of Daniel's coworkers she had always been friendly with. She spent 3 days on the cake alone, getting the frosting swirled exactly the way Cooper liked it, which was in large circles starting from the outside edge. Daniel said he had invited a few people as well. He did not mention Jessica. He did not mention that he had told Jessica this was her moment to walk through the front door of Claire's home as though she belonged in it. Claire saw it happen in real time. Jessica arrived in a sundress and oversized sunglasses, designer bag on one arm, Daniel's hand on the other. Melissa met her at the gate and hugged her, the way you hug someone you have been expecting and have been looking forward to seeing for a long time. Claire was standing at the food table with a tray of sandwiches she had cut into triangles because Cooper believed, with the conviction of a 5-year-old, that triangle sandwiches tasted better than square ones. She set the tray down slowly. She looked at Jessica, standing in her yard beside her husband. She understood then, with complete clarity, that this party was not a birthday party. It was a demonstration, and she was the thing being demonstrated against. The candles were lit at 3 in the afternoon. 35 people gathered in a backyard that Claire had decorated with tape and love and 3 days of careful, quiet preparation. The streamers moved in the September breeze. The T-Rex pinata hung from the pecan tree. The dinosaur plates were stacked neatly at the end of the food table. Cooper stood on a small step stool to reach the candles. His face glowed in the light of 5 little flames. His eyes were wide with the specific seriousness of a child who understands that wishing is important work. Claire knelt beside him, one hand on his small back. "Make a wish, baby," she said quietly. He squeezed his eyes shut, his whole face scrunched with the effort of wishing hard enough. He blew out all 5 candles in one breath. Everyone clapped. Claire smiled, a real one, the first one that day that had not cost her anything to make. For exactly 1 second, everything in that yard was simply a birthday party. Then Daniel stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not make a speech. He did not raise his voice or show any sign of the anger that would have at least been honest. He put one hand on the back of Claire's head and pressed her face down into the cake. Not a push, a press. Slow, deliberate, the specific force of a decision already made. The sound was soft, like something breaking underwater. Blue frosting exploded outward across the tablecloth. It covered her eyes, her nose, the corners of her mouth. Her hands shot out and gripped the table edge, with both palms flat and firm. Her body went completely rigid. The September air pressed against the back of her neck. The backyard went silent in under 2 seconds. Jessica raised her phone. She hit record before the silence had fully settled. She was already smiling, not nervously, not from shock, but with the satisfied smile of someone watching a plan arrive at exactly the moment it was scheduled to arrive. Melissa crossed her arms. She looked at her son. She nodded once, slowly, the way a person nods when something long anticipated has finally occurred. She turned to Sandra and said, quietly enough to be a whisper, but loudly enough to carry, "Finally. Maybe now she will understand her place." 34 adults stood frozen. Not one person moved toward Claire. Not one voice said, "Stop." Not one hand reached out. The only person who moved was Cooper. He screamed, "Mommy!" He launched himself off the step stool and ran across the grass, with both arms stretched out. Stumbling, reaching for her face, his small hands finding her cheeks, trying to wipe away what had been done. "Mommy, mommy, mommy!" His voice cracked through that silence, like a line driven through ice. Claire lifted her head. Blue frosting dripped from her chin. Tears ran lines through the icing. She could feel the heat of 35 people standing around her, none of them moving, all of them choosing to be somewhere else in their minds. She did not scream. She did not curse. She did not throw a single thing. She reached down. She picked up her son. She wiped his tears first with the corner of her own sleeve before she touched her own face. Then she turned and walked inside. The screen door closed softly behind her. Daniel turned back to the party with the ease of a man who has already moved on. "She is fine," he said. "She is always dramatic." Jessica reviewed the footage on her phone. She sent it to her own number. She smiled at what she saw. Melissa told the guests the party was still going. Sandra helped herself to a piece of the ruined cake. Inside the hallway bathroom, Claire locked the door. Cooper was on her hip, his face buried in her neck, his small body shaking with the effort of a 5-year-old trying to understand something his nervous system knew was wrong before his brain had language for it. She stood at the sink. She looked at herself in the mirror. Blue frosting covered her face like a mask that someone else had chosen for her. Her mascara had run in dark lines through the icing. The silver compass bracelet at her wrist was smeared with cake. She cleaned the bracelet first, gently, with the corner of a washcloth, more carefully than she cleaned her own skin. She rubbed the small compass charm until the silver caught the bathroom light again. She looked at her son. "Mama is okay, baby," she whispered. Mama is always okay. Her hands would not stop shaking. 40 minutes later, with Cooper asleep on the bathroom rug with a folded towel beneath his head, Claire checked her phone. 49 notifications. Jessica had posted the video publicly within the hour. It had already been shared to 3 Facebook groups, a Reddit thread, and a gossip account with 200,000 followers. The caption read, "When she finally gets what she deserves," followed by a laughing face. The comments were split. Some people thought it was a prank. Some called Claire dramatic. Some asked, in the specific moral outrage of people who would have done the same thing as those 34 adults if they had been in that yard, why no one moved to help her. But they were all watching, every single one of them. Claire's worst moment. The 3 days of baking, the streamers she had hung with her own hands, the triangles she had cut into sandwiches for a 5-year-old who believed in the superior taste of triangles, all of it had been compressed into 47 seconds of footage that was now traveling across the internet at the speed of other people's entertainment. She set the phone down. Then she picked it back up because she needed to check the bank account. She needed to know if she had enough money to take Cooper somewhere safe for the night. She called the automated line. The system read her balance, negative $2,340. She pressed 0 for a representative. She waited on hold for 6 minutes, listening to music that was designed to be calming and was not. A man answered. She asked about the balance. He told her there had been a cash advance taken against a credit line attached to her Social Security number 3 weeks prior, a card she had never applied for, a card she had never activated, a card she had never once held in her hands. "Ma'am, the primary cardholder authorized it using your information." Her name, Daniel's authorization. She asked how much was on the card. $40,000 in charges. Hotels, jewelry, weekend trips, a spa visit, billed the morning after she had driven Cooper to his pediatric checkup alone because Daniel had something he needed to do. Designer items shipped to an address that was not their house, all in her name, all without her knowledge, all without her signature. She sat down on the bathroom floor. Her son was asleep a foot away, his chest rising and falling in the even rhythm of a child who still trusts the world enough to sleep deeply in it. She had no money. Her credit was destroyed. Her face was on the internet, covered in birthday cake frosting, made from her own 3 days of work. And the man who had arranged all of it was downstairs in her backyard with the woman he had chosen instead, laughing. Here's where I want to stop the story completely for a moment. Not to add drama, not to make you feel worse before you feel better, but because I want you to sit with the specific weight of that bathroom floor, a woman with a sleeping child on her shoulder. No money, no plan, no one in that backyard who had moved toward her, the world telling her, in every language available to it, that she did not matter. That was not the end of Claire Harrington's story. That was the floor. And the floor, as it turns out, is exactly where some people discover what they are actually built from. Because something happened in that bathroom, in the quiet dark while her son slept, and the water dripped from the faucet. She had forgotten to shut off completely. Something inside her that had been very still for a very long time stood up. 3 a.m. Cooper was asleep beside her on the bed. His hand was curled around his toy dinosaur. His breathing was slow and steady, the breathing of a child who has cried himself to a deep and deserved rest. Claire lay beside him, in the dark, with the phone in her hands. She had been staring at it for 40 minutes. She scrolled to a contact she had not dialed in 4 years. Not from anger, not from distance, from the particular pride of a woman who made a choice and needed to live fully inside it. without her father's voice reminding her who she was. George Harrington. She pressed call. It rang twice. Claire Bear. His voice was exactly the same, unhurried, steady. The voice of a man who has been standing in the same place for a long time and is not surprised by the weather. She did not cry. She had cried herself empty weeks before the birthday party. What was left was something flatter and cleaner. Not numb exactly, resolved. She said, "Dad, I need to tell you everything, and when I am done, I need you to let me decide what happens next. Not you, me. Can you do that?" A pause. "Yes," he said. "Tell me everything." She talked for 90 minutes. She told him all of it. The year of small erosions, the dinners eaten alone, Melissa's campaign, Jessica's arrival, the text on the phone, Cooper's bag that was packed before the phone call, the birthday party, the cake, the video, the bank account. Her voice stayed flat and even the whole time, clear, like a person reading the facts of someone else's case aloud in a courtroom. George listened without interrupting once. When she finished, the line was quiet for 10 full seconds. Then he said, "What do you want, Claire?" "Not I will handle this. Not no one touches my daughter. Not a promise of vengeance dressed up as love. What do you want?" She said, "I want Cooper safe. I want what he did with my name documented and addressed through every legal channel available. And I want to walk back into my own life standing up. I am not asking you to fight for me, Daddy. I am asking you to hand me what I need and trust me to use it." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "That is my girl." Harold Pike called Claire directly the following morning. He had been George Harrington's legal counsel for 23 years. He was 64, silver-haired, and spoke in a register so measured that opposing attorneys often spent the first 10 minutes of any meeting trying to determine if he was taking them seriously. He was always taking them seriously. He simply saw no reason to perform urgency. He asked her one question before they began. "What outcome do you want? Not what you are angry about." "What outcome?" She told him, specifically. Primary custody of Cooper established before anything else moved. The credit fraud documented and reported to the appropriate authorities. The video preserved as evidence of emotional abuse for the divorce proceedings. Nothing more, nothing theatrical. Just the facts placed in the right rooms with the right weight behind them. Harold made notes. Then he said, "Give me 72 hours. He called back in 48. "Mrs. Shaw," he said, "we have pulled Jessica Caldwell's background. The prior pattern of 2 previous relationships is documented and usable. But there is something else." He paused. The kind of pause that means what follows is going to change the shape of everything. "Ms. Caldwell and your mother-in-law, Melissa Shaw, have a documented relationship predating Ms. Caldwell's employment at the dealership by 14 months. We have phone records and a financial transaction. Ms. Shaw made a payment to Ms. Caldwell's account approximately 1 week after Ms. Caldwell submitted her employment application to the dealership." Claire was quiet. "Melissa did not simply tolerate the affair," Harold said. "She initiated it. She recruited Jessica Caldwell, cultivated the relationship, and arranged the introduction to your husband. We have the documentation." Claire sat down slowly in the kitchen chair. She thought about every Sunday dinner, every whispered campaign, every time Melissa had shown up at exactly the right moment to take Cooper, to plant another seed, to position herself in the space between Claire and Daniel, like someone tending a garden she intended to harvest. She thought about the birthday party, Melissa's arms crossed. That single word, finally. She had not been watching a marriage fall apart. She had been watching a woman dismantle her family deliberately over years, because she had decided long ago that Claire Whitmore was not the right woman for her son and had chosen to do something about it. "What do you need from me?" Claire asked. "Nothing yet," Harold said. "Just hold on a little longer." 3 weeks after the birthday party, Daniel Shaw received an invitation. Thick cardstock, gold lettering, the Tennessee Business Leadership Summit, black tie, Grand Hyatt Nashville. A note inside indicating he had been selected for VYP recognition as an outstanding community contributor. He called Jessica from the dealership parking lot the moment he read it. "Baby," he said, "we have a gala." She responded with exactly the enthusiasm he had come to depend on. He bought a new tie. He had his shoes resoled. He told Melissa to get her hair done. He told Sandra to find something elegant. He did not know that George Harrington was the event's primary sponsor. He had never needed to know that name. He arrived with Jessica on his arm and Melissa at his side and took his place at the VIP table near the front of the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, a live band playing something soft and tasteful. 300 of the most influential people in the city of Nashville in one room. Daniel surveyed it with the satisfaction of a man who believes he has finally arrived somewhere worthy of him. Melissa straightened her pearl necklace and said, "This is exactly the life you deserve, baby." Sandra took photographs for her social media accounts. Nobody mentioned Claire. Nobody thought about her. She had been erased from the evening before it began. Chico. That afternoon, a garment box arrived at Diane's house, where Claire and Cooper had been staying. Inside, a navy gown, simple and precisely cut, the kind of garment that does not need ornamentation because the woman wearing it is the ornamentation. A note in George's handwriting, on a small card tucked into the tissue paper. "You are the compass, Claire Bear. You always were." Diane stood in the doorway of the guest room while Claire dressed. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "You look like someone who is about to change the ending of a story." Claire fastened the compass bracelet at her wrist. She looked at herself in the mirror. She did not look triumphant. She did not look angry. She did not look like a woman performing a return. She looked like a woman who has walked through enough fire to know that she is not the thing that burns. George spoke first at the summit. He did not mention Claire by name. He talked about legacy, about the difference between men who build something real and men who spend their lives performing success while quietly destroying the people standing closest to them. He talked about what it costs a family when power is confused with cruelty. He spoke without notes and with the unhurried authority of a man who has never needed a room to like him in order to fill it. The room listened with the focused attention of people who could feel that the words were aimed at something specific. Then George said, "Tonight I would like to introduce someone who has shown me more about grace under genuine pressure than anyone I have known in my 67 years. My daughter." The ballroom doors opened. Claire walked in, posture straight, eyes forward, navy gown, the compass bracelet at her wrist, catching every light in that room. No performance, no expression of triumph, just stillness. Complete and unshakable stillness. The kind that comes from a woman who has decided, finally, that she is done being small in spaces that should have always belonged to her. She did not look at Daniel's table. She walked through the center of that ballroom, and conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks lowered, glasses paused at lips. 300 people went quiet in the particular way people go quiet when they feel they are watching something that matters. She climbed the stage steps. She took her father's hand. She turned and faced the room. Daniel's champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. His brain was working to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. His wife, on that stage, next to that man. The man whose name was on the gold lettering of the invitation sitting in Daniel's breast pocket right now. Jessica's hand slid off his arm. Her smile collapsed, not slowly, all at once, like a structure with nothing holding it up. Melissa gripped the tablecloth with both hands. Her knuckles went white. The pearl necklace she had bought on credit felt, in that moment, very heavy and very small. Sandra lowered her phone for the first time all evening. Claire took the microphone from her father. She held it steady. Her voice did not shake. She did not raise it. She did not need to. I want to tell you a story, she said, about a woman who had everything and gave it up, not because she was forced to, and not because she was naive, but because she believed with her whole heart that love was worth more than a last name. That being chosen for who you are is worth more than being valued for what you come from. She told it. All of it. The choice to leave Asheville, the farmer's market, the man who pretended to look at honey for 4 minutes because he could not figure out how to start a conversation. The wedding in the Tennessee hills, her mother's dress, the compass bracelet at her wrist as she said I do, the dinners eaten alone, the candles that melted before he came home, the receipts, the strand of hair, the text message, being told she should be grateful he still came home at all. Her son's overnight bag that was packed before the phone call was made to collect him. 3 weeks ago, she said, I stood in my backyard at my son's 5th birthday party. I had spent 3 days making a cake, blue frosting, 3 layers. My little boy blew out the candles, and then my husband grabbed the back of my head and pressed my face into that cake, slowly and deliberately, in front of every person I had invited into our home. The room did not breathe. His girlfriend recorded it on her phone. She was smiling before she hit record. His mother crossed her arms and nodded and said, loudly enough for me to hear, finally. Maybe now she will understand her place. And not one adult in that yard moved. She paused. 5 full seconds of silence. The only person who came to me was my 5-year-old son. He ran across the yard with both arms out, screaming my name. She let that land. That woman is me. She did not point. She did not need to. Every head in that room turned toward Daniel's table. He sat frozen, jaw locked, eyes wide with the specific fear of a man who has just understood that the ground he built everything on was never actually his. Behind Claire, a screen lit up. The video played. 47 seconds. In a room full of 300 people who now knew exactly who her father was, who understood the full weight of what they were watching. Every second of that footage landed like a verdict delivered in the right room at last. No one laughed. Harold Pike stepped to a second microphone. He was calm, professional. His voice carried without being raised. He announced the formal documentation of credit fraud totaling $40,000, opened in Claire Shaw's name without her knowledge or consent, and confirmed that legal proceedings had been initiated with the Tennessee Attorney General. He noted that the property Daniel Shaw currently occupied had always been held in a Harrington family trust, and that occupancy had been formally revoked that evening. Then he said, additionally, we have obtained documentation confirming that the introduction between Daniel Shaw and Jessica Caldwell was arranged deliberately by Melissa Shaw 14 months prior to Ms. Caldwell's employment at the dealership, and was accompanied by a documented financial payment. This was intentional. It is documented, and it will be presented in full in the civil proceedings. The room went completely still. Melissa stood up from her chair, one hand flat on the table. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Daniel turned to look at his mother. She sat back down. He reached under the table for Jessica's hand. It was not there. Jessica was already composing a text on her phone. Not to Daniel, not about Daniel. She had identified her next situation 3 weeks prior and was already managing her exit with the calm efficiency of someone who has done this enough times to have developed a system. She did not say goodbye. She did not look at him. She simply became, in the space of that moment, someone who had already left the building. Claire placed the microphone gently on the podium. She kissed her father on the cheek. She walked off the stage with the same unhurried stillness she had walked in with. She did not look back. The room parted for her like a tide making way for something that belongs to the shore. Daniel Shaw was served papers at the dealership on Monday morning, in the parking lot, in front of 3 coworkers who had stood in his backyard 3 weeks earlier and watched his wife walk inside, alone with frosting on her face, and said nothing. They did not look at him the same way now. They looked at him with the particular discomfort of people who know they made a choice they cannot undo, who have spent the intervening weeks quietly rearranging the memory of what they witnessed so that their own stillness feels more defensible than it was. His manager called him into the back office and told him the video, now recontextualized by the summit coverage, by George Harrington's name, by the fraud documentation that had been picked up by 2 local news outlets, had resurfaced with complete detail, that the company needed to protect its reputation, that he was being placed on indefinite unpaid leave, effective immediately. He drove to the house. The locks were changed. His clothes were in boxes on the front porch, folded neatly, even his shirts, folded the right way, collar tucked, sleeves pressed flat, the way Claire had taught him at the farmer's market on their 3rd date, when she had laughed at how badly he had been doing it and shown him instead. That detail undid something in him more completely than any legal document. He called her phone. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. Her voice on the recording was calm, unbothered, the voice of a woman who has moved to the other side of something he was just beginning to fall into. He drove to Jessica's apartment building, buzzed her unit. No answer. Buzzed again. He went inside and found the building manager, who told him Ms. Caldwell had vacated the unit 4 days ago. Cleared out. No forwarding address, not a piece of furniture remaining, not a scent in the air. She had left nothing behind because to her, Daniel Shaw had always been nothing more than a chapter she had already finished reading. He sat in a Walgreens parking lot with the engine off and his hands on the steering wheel and stared at nothing for a very long time. And then it arrived, not slowly, all at once, like a wave that had been building in water he had never bothered to look at. What he had lost, not the house he had never owned, not the income, not the status. Her. The woman who woke up at 4 a.m. to bake a birthday cake for his son because she wanted everything to be perfect. Who set tables with candles on ordinary Wednesdays for no reason except that she loved him. Who greeted every guest with genuine warmth even when they treated her like furniture. Who touched a silver bracelet for courage and never once explained what it meant. Who had a father who could buy every dealership in the state and had never said a word about it. She had loved him that much. She had trusted him with everything, and he had destroyed it. For a woman who had been composing her exit text before she walked out the door. Melissa stopped attending her church after 3 members approached her in the parking lot following the summit. Her Sunday school class quietly reassigned her. She stopped hosting holiday dinners. She stopped calling Sandra daily. She sat in her kitchen in Clarksville for a long time after Daniel confronted her. The house was very quiet. For the first time in 30 years of building her son into a version of himself that only existed in her telling of it, Melissa Shaw had nothing left to say. Sandra's Instagram post, the steakhouse photograph, had been screenshotted before she deleted it. Screenshots live longer than regret. Her employer called her in for a conversation about company values. She deleted her accounts, But the digital record had already been threaded into the internet the way thread is threaded into fabric, part of the structure now, not going anywhere. Jessica surfaced 6 months later in Memphis. Different city, different man, same blueprint, same patience, same practiced warmth, aimed at exactly the right vulnerabilities. But Harold Pike's office had been expecting it. He had already forwarded the full documentation to a family law attorney in Memphis. At the request of that man's wife, who had found them through a quiet network Claire had helped establish after returning to Asheville. Claire never announced it. She never publicized it. She simply made herself available to women who needed what she had once needed on a bathroom floor at 3 in the morning. Someone to hand them the right tool and step back. 2 weeks after the summit, Claire packed her and Cooper's things into her old Honda Civic, the same car she had driven into Nashville 11 years earlier when she was 22 years old, carrying one bag, a compass bracelet, and the belief that love was worth more than a last name. Cooper sat in the back seat with his toy dinosaur and his sneakers on the wrong feet because he had insisted on putting them on himself, and she had not had the heart to correct him. He fell asleep somewhere in the foothills, his head tilted against the window, his chest rising and falling, in the easy rhythm of a child who still trusts the world enough to sleep deeply inside it. Claire drove through the Blue Ridge Mountains. As the sun came up over the ridge, the light came through the trees in long gold bars. The road curved through the foothills, and she knew every turn of it, the way you know a thing you have carried in your body since childhood. She touched the compass bracelet once. She did not look in the rearview mirror. The estate was exactly as she remembered. The stone fountain at the end of the main drive, the oak trees along the east fence going amber and gold in the October light. The library. The back porch where George had told her stories about Margaret on Sunday evenings when she was small enough to believe that the world was fundamentally good and that the people in it mostly meant well. Cooper ran through the gardens on his first afternoon. He chased a rabbit. He collected dandelions in his fist and presented them to Claire with the seriousness of someone giving a meaningful gift. George put him on his shoulders and walked the garden paths until the dinner hour. That evening, Claire and George sat on the back porch, 2 glasses of sweet tea, the October light falling in long gold bars across the porch floor. After a long time, Claire said, "I thought love was supposed to feel like home." George took a slow sip. He set his glass on the armrest. He watched Cooper in the garden below, a small figure in the fading light, turning dandelions into treasure. Then he turned to his daughter and said, "It is, Claire Bear. You were just in the wrong house." She smiled. Small, real, the first one in a very long time that had not cost her anything to make. Cooper turned 6 on the Saturday in October. The kitchen in the Asheville estate was 10 times the size of the one in Nashville. Marble countertops, double ovens, windows that let in so much morning light, the room almost glowed. The cake was homemade, vanilla sponge, 3 layers, blue frosting, made by Claire's hands on a Friday morning, while Cooper sat on the counter and attempted to sneak his finger into the mixing bowl twice, and was caught both times and thought this was hilarious. It was never about the kitchen. It was never about the size of the house or the marble countertops or the double ovens. It was about a mother's hands making something sweet for her child, and that had not changed. It would not change. The people around the table were different now. George at the head, Diane and her husband across from Claire, Diane having driven up from Nashville with deviled eggs and good wine and the cheerful refusal to make anything sentimental. Harold Pike had sent flowers, which Cooper had immediately tried to use as part of a game involving the toy dinosaur and unclear rules. Cooper's kindergarten teacher Beverly had come, a woman who had called Claire 6 weeks into the school year, to say that Cooper was one of the most empathetic children she had taught in 14 years, and she thought Claire should know that. These were people who said Claire's name with warmth and meant it when they said it, who looked at Cooper and saw exactly what he was, a miracle in dinosaur sneakers, who put his shoes on the wrong feet by choice and collected dandelions like currency and still believed, with his whole heart, that wishing on birthday candles was serious and important work. When the candles were lit and the room began to sing, Claire stood behind her son, with her hands resting gently on his shoulders. He looked up at her over his shoulder. There was already frosting on his finger from the taste he had stolen when he thought she was not watching. She had watched. She had said nothing. "Some things are worth allowing. Make a wish, Mommy," he said. She laughed, a wide, unhurried, unguarded laugh, the kind that only comes after a woman has walked through fire and found out, on the other side, that she was never the thing that burned. She was the thing that survived. "Baby," she said, "I already got it." He blew out all 6 candles in one breath. The room erupted. Real applause from people who meant it, from people who had chosen to be in that room because they wanted to be there, not because obligation put them there. The compass bracelet caught the October morning light through the kitchen window and glowed at her wrist like a small and steady star, like something that had been pointing true north all along, even in the years when she had not been ready to follow it. She had followed it now. Lesson: what this story taught me. Before we close, I want to talk to you directly, not as a storyteller, performing the end of a drama, as someone who has been sitting with Claire's story and thinking about what it actually means. Because there are 5 things this story taught me, and I believe they are worth saying out loud. The first thing: silence is not weakness. There is a specific kind of strength that looks, from the outside, exactly like patience. That gets mistaken for submission. That gets exploited by people who confuse quietness with having nothing to say. Claire was never powerless. She was waiting, whether she consciously knew it or not, for the moment when the truth could be told in the right room, with the right weight, to the right audience. She did not fight every battle as it came because she understood, somewhere below conscious thought, that winning the small fights would cost her the ability to win the one that mattered. She was not silent because she was afraid. She was building. The second thing: love should never require you to become invisible. If the person you are with only accepts you when you are smaller, quieter, more convenient, more diminished, that is not love. That is control, wearing love's clothing. And it is one of the hardest things in the world to see from inside it, because the person doing it to you is usually the one you trusted most completely. The cruelty is not dramatic at the beginning. It is quiet, incremental, a series of small moments that each seem survivable. An empty table, a passed-over greeting, a silence where a defense should have been, until one day you are in your own backyard at your child's birthday party, holding a cake you spent 3 days making, and the man who was supposed to choose you is showing the world exactly how little you mean to him. The third thing, and this one is for anyone who has ever stood in a backyard and watched something happen that they knew was wrong and said nothing. Your silence is a vote. Every time we choose our comfort over someone else's crisis, every time we look at our shoes while something wrong happens in front of us, we cast a vote. We tell the person being harmed, "You are alone in this." We make the world a little colder, and we tell ourselves it was not our place to make it warmer. A 5-year-old boy was the only person in that yard brave enough to run to his mother. Think about that. Think about what that means about the adults standing around him. And the next time you are in a room where a moment asks you to choose between comfort and courage, remember the 5-year-old. Be braver than the adults in that yard. The fourth thing, your worth is not determined by what someone else does with it. Daniel tried to weaponize Claire's love. Melissa tried to engineer her erasure from her own family. Jessica treated her life like a hallway, something to walk through on the way to somewhere more useful. And through all of it, Claire's worth did not change. Not once. It was always there. It was always hers. It was always real. The only question was when she would decide to pick it back up. The fifth thing, the one I want you to carry with you. The woman they underestimate today is very often the one they answer to tomorrow. Not because she got lucky, not because her father had resources, but because she never stopped being exactly who she was, even when that cost her everything. Even when she was sitting on a bathroom floor at 3 in the morning with a sleeping child on her shoulder and nothing in a bank account someone else had emptied, even then, she knew who she was. The compass bracelet did not point north because it was silver. It pointed north because she finally decided to follow it. And that is something that no one, no husband, no mother-in-law, no carefully planned intruder, no viral video, no public statement drafted by a lawyer at 9 in the evening can take from a woman who has decided to remember it. So before you judge someone's silence, consider what they might be building inside it. Before you underestimate the quiet woman in the room, consider what she might already know that you do not. And if you are that woman right now, if any part of this story felt less like entertainment and more like looking in a mirror, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not at the end of your story. You are at the floor, and the floor, as it turns out, is exactly where you find out what you are made of. If this story stayed with you, if any part of Claire's journey felt familiar, or gave you something real to think about, or reminded you of someone you love, share it today. Not tomorrow, today. Because someone in your life might be sitting on a bathroom floor right now, and they might need to hear that the floor is not the ending, that the quiet woman in the room is not powerless, that the compass still points north even when everything around it is in chaos. Subscribe to this channel. Every week, we bring you stories like this one. Stories about strength that did not announce itself, about consequences that arrived slowly and then all at once, about people who found their way back to themselves when the world gave them every reason not to. Hit the notification bell so you never miss one. And if you have ever been the person in that backyard who stayed still when you should have moved, it is not too late to be different next time. That is the whole point of every story we tell here. I will see you in the next one. Editorial disclaimer. This is a work of dramatic fiction created for entertainment, emotional reflection, and storytelling purposes. All characters, names, locations, and events depicted in this story are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental. This channel does not endorse, glorify, or minimize any form of domestic abuse, financial fraud, emotional manipulation, or coercive control. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic abuse or financial exploitation, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You are not alone. Help is available.